Welcome to Beneath the Noise. Today, we're diving into something that's a huge part of my life: bipolar disorder. If you've been following my story, you know that it's not just some label on a piece of paper. It's been a lived experience that shaped everything from my career to my relationships. Bipolar disorder is a mental health condition where you experience extreme mood swings. Think of them as emotional highs, mania or hypomania, and lows, depression. For some people, those highs are full-blown mania. For others, they're hypomanic episodes. The difference between the two? Mania is more intense. It can require hospitalization and can interfere with your ability to function. Hypomania, on the other hand, is like a less severe version of mania. You're still energetic, you're still high, but it doesn't completely derail your life all the time. You can still be functional, but you're not quite in control. And let's say something else up front. Having moods does not make you bipolar. If I had $1 for every time somebody called their ex so bipolar because they changed their mind about dinner, I could personally fund mental health care reform. Being passionate, indecisive, or even just a little dramatic, not the same as a literal mood disorder. Trust me, if bipolar disorder meant just having feelings, I wouldn't need 3 mental health professionals, a mood tracker, and a small pharmacy to get through my week. So let's talk about the highs of bipolar disorder. There are 2 main types, and it is important to remember that they exist on a complex spectrum. While I am going to explain this very simply, remember this is a rudimentary education on what bipolar disorder really is. Hypomania is like having the best energy boost of your life, until it isn't. It's when your brain hits the gas pedal and suddenly everything is clicking. Ideas come faster, you talk faster, you feel like the most productive, charming, and capable version of yourself. And honestly, sometimes it feels amazing. But here's the catch. It doesn't stay amazing. Hypomania can make you impulsive, restless, and irritable. You might start projects you never finish, spend money you don't really have, say things you wouldn't normally say. It doesn't get to the level of full psychosis, and most people with hypomania can still function in daily life, but that doesn't mean it's harmless. It's like running on adrenaline 24/7, and eventually you crash. Some common symptoms of hypomania include increased energy and decreased need for sleep, such as feeling well rested after just a few hours, racing thoughts and fast speech, jumping from topic to topic in conversation, feeling unusually confident or invincible, increased productivity or creativity, which can result in starting multiple projects at once, increased impulsivity, like spending money recklessly and making impulsive decisions, heightened emotions like euphoria, but also sudden irritability, also hypersocial behavior, talking excessively and needing constant stimulation. For years, this was my reality. I had hypomania, not full-blown mania. And because I could still function, I didn't think it was a problem. No one really noticed it for what it was. People just thought I was driven or intense. Hell, I thought that too. But looking back, I can see the patterns. I can see the relationships I burned through, the reckless decisions I justified, and the way my mind never really slowed down. Hypomania can make you feel unstoppable, but it doesn't mean you actually are. I would cycle rapidly for years between hypomania and depression. I wasn't properly diagnosed until 25, so I didn't know what was going on, or what it was called, but looking back, like I said, I can see the patterns. I moved around a lot as a kid, but theater was always my constant. No matter where I was, if there was a stage, I could find my people. The backstage world felt safe, predictable, in a way that my mind never was. There was something grounding about the ritual of it, the smell of the sawdust from the set pieces, the precise click of a lighting cue, the way everything worked in controlled chaos. No matter how scattered I felt, I could always lose myself in the work. The work was everything to me. Sets, lights, stage management, I would do it all for the love of the game. I was dedicated more to the theater than I had ever been to anything in my life. I wanted to make it my entire life. I wanted to go to college for it and work in it and immerse myself deep in the feeling of trust and love that I experienced in my high school theater club. Theater taught me how to work, how to communicate, how to trust others in ways that I never knew were possible for me. I would be so deep in the work, I never knew when to come up for air. So when I started to lose the traction out from under me, I could never catch when I was going to slip. Because the thing about having bipolar disorder, especially when you don't know you have it yet, is you don't realize when your coping mechanisms stop being enough. During hypomanic phases, I was electric. I wasn't just part of the crew, I was the crew. I would spend 50, 60 hours a week in the auditorium, completely shirking all responsibility that wasn't getting the show done. And people went along with it because hypomania is seductive. It makes you fun. It makes you inspiring. People love the intensity right up until they don't. Then came the crashes. One day I was on top of the world. The next I was skipping rehearsals, missing cues, and disappearing into myself. And the worst part, I didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell people that one day you care so much it consumes you, and the next you feel nothing at all? That you don't even recognize the person you were a week ago? Then at 25, I experienced a real manic episode. Mania is hypomania's unhinged older sibling. The one that doesn't just push boundaries, it demolishes them completely. Where hypomania can make you feel like you're on top of the world, mania takes you somewhere else entirely. It is an altered state. And the scariest part is when you are manic, you don't always know there is something wrong. Mania is what landed me in the hospital as an adult. It was the only full manic episode I've ever had, and it was a completely different experience than hypomania. The energy was uncontrollable. The thoughts didn't just race, they sprinted. I wasn't just impulsive, I was delusional. And I genuinely believed things that weren't real. That is the difference between hypomania and mania. Hypomania can be reckless, but mania can be dangerous. Common symptoms of mania include severe decreased need for sleep, like going multiple days without feeling tired, extreme euphoria or irritability, rapid, pressured speech, and This one hits very close to home because I have a lot of distinct memories of being in the hospital and thoughts coming to my head and being out of my mouth before I could realize they were even there. It was compulsive. It was pathological. I could not keep words inside of my brain. Embarrassingly so. Another symptom is racing thoughts to the point of confusion. Also, increased risk-taking behavior like reckless spending, dangerous sexual behavior, and impulsive travel. Also, grandiosity and delusions. This can also lead to psychosis or hallucinations, seeing things or hearing things that aren't there. Extreme paranoia as well. The thing about mania is that it doesn't feel bad at first. In the beginning, it can feel like you've unlocked a secret level of life in where everything is possible. But then it spirals. And before you know it, you're making decisions that could ruin your life. Or in my case, you wake up in a psych ward piecing together what happened. So why does the distinction matter? Because hypomania and mania aren't just different in intensity, they're different in consequence. Hypomania, while disruptive, doesn't usually require hospitalization. Mania can wreck your life in a matter of days. And for people with bipolar 1, mania comes often without warning. One day you're just a little more energetic than usual. Next you're on a completely different plane of reality, making choices that don't feel like choices at all. Like I briefly touched on before, in my case, I've had several dozen hypomanic episodes throughout my life, which often meant I felt like I was on top of the world, full of energy, making decisions I wouldn't normally make. It felt like I was just on. But looking back, it's clear I was racing through life in ways that weren't sustainable. Hypomania might not stop you from going to work or hanging out with your friends, but it can make everything feel heightened, and you feel invincible until you crash. Then came my one full manic episode. And let me tell you, that was a different beast entirely. Unlike the hypomanic episodes where I could still hold it together, this one was the real deal. I remember feeling like I could do anything. My mind was racing 1,000,000 miles a minute and I was convinced I was invincible. I was making impulsive decisions that I thought were genius at the time, buying things I didn't need, making plans that were completely out of touch with reality. The problem with mania, though, is that it doesn't just mess with your mind. It messes with your entire life. I ended up in the hospital because I was not okay. I thought I was fine, but everyone around me could see the cracks that I couldn't. Because that's the reality of mania. It's not fun. It's chaotic. And mania isn't just the wild, unpredictable high. It's the sheer confidence that you are living in the absolute center of it all. Even when you're just sitting in your car in traffic, screaming at your own reflection in the rearview mirror, you're convinced that every encounter is dripping with cosmic significance like you're the next Tyler Durden, ready to tear down the system. Except it's all happening in your head and none of it makes sense. But you feel it, and that's what matters. It's like my thoughts were this unedited, chaotic screenplay that should make sense but doesn't. I'd talk to people like that I was giving them some life-changing wisdom, and they were probably wondering why I couldn't stop speeding through sentences. It wasn't intellectual. It wasn't profound. It was just manic delusion wrapped in confidence, wrapped in reckless energy. Like I was going to really change the world one incoherent conversation at a time. And what is a manic episode if not an unfiltered fever dream version of Fight Club? It wasn't that I was feeling invincible. I was convinced I was invincible. Like I could punch the mirror, see the cracks, and somehow fix the entire world with that one action. The lines between delusion and truth blurred. Every minor decision I made felt like it was the most important, world-altering moment in history. Like buying a coffee was actually my own personal rebellion. Maybe Tyler Durden would have agreed. Fuck, I don't know. But here's where things get really Fight Club-esque. When the manic chaos starts to spin out of control, you realize you're not even in control anymore. You're the one with the megaphone, shouting about the collapse of society, but your own life's completely imploding behind the scenes. It's not until the crash comes, and you wake up to nothing, no plot, no control, no existential realization, that you realize how much of the ride was just smoke and mirrors. Then you're left to pick up the pieces of the explosion you set off in your own head. And that's the scariest part. Mania feels like it's a secret club where everybody's in on the joke except you. You think you're Tyler Durden, but you're not. You're just a person who's spiraling, thinking you've got the world figured out, only to realize the universe isn't taking notes from your screenplay. Suddenly you're not Tyler Durden anymore, conquering the world. You're Edward Norton with a gunshot hole in his cheek watching your life blow up. Then treatment comes, and medication. But it's work. No one hands you a perfect little pill that fixes everything. Finding the right treatment is trial and error, a long, frustrating game of psychiatric roulette. I'll never forget my first time on Depakote. The first few weeks, I wasn't manic or depressed, but I also wasn't me. It was like someone had taken my personality and put it on mute. I wasn't thinking a mile a minute. I wasn't coming up with wild ideas at 2 a.m. I wasn't overwhelmed by emotion, but I also wasn't feeling anything at all. I remember telling my psychiatrist, I think it's working, but I also feel like I'm watching my life happen instead of living it. And she just nodded, like, yep, sounds about right. Cool, thanks for that. It took months of trial and error, switching meds, adjusting dosages, advocating for myself, before I landed on something that actually worked. And even now, it's not perfect. Medication doesn't cure bipolar disorder, but it gives you a fighting chance. But even the right meds don't mean you're cured. They don't do the work for you. That's where therapy comes in. And therapy isn't some neat inspirational journey where you lie on a couch and unlock all the secrets to your past. It's also work. Sometimes it's frustrating, sometimes it's uncomfortable, and sometimes it feels like you're just sitting there, paying someone to ask, and how does that make you feel? But it's also where I learned how to recognize my patterns, how to pull myself back when I started slipping into hypomania, how to separate my instincts from my impulses. One of the biggest things therapy gives me is a reality check. My therapist once told me, you can't logic your way out of bipolar disorder. And that pissed me off because I really thought I could. I thought if I just understood it enough, if I saw it coming, I could outthink it. But that's not how this works. Therapy is not about beating bipolar disorder. It's about learning how to live with it, how to work around the chaos. how to pick up the pieces when things inevitably do fall apart. Because at the end of the day, stability isn't some grand life-altering moment. It's a series of small, unremarkable choices. It's taking your meds even when you feel fine and think you don't need them. It's going to therapy even when you don't want to talk. And it's getting 8 hours of sleep even when your brain is telling you you don't need it. It's recognizing that recovery isn't about eliminating the disorder. It's about learning how to exist with it day after day without letting it consume you. And honestly, that's harder than mania ever was. When you live with bipolar disorder, the highs and lows don't just affect you. They spill into everything, especially your relationships. My friends thought I was intense, passionate, and maybe a little unpredictable. But what they didn't know is they were unknowingly strapped to a roller coaster with me. And eventually, one by one, they started to step off. When I was young, I just thought I wasn't enough. Wasn't good enough at being a friend. Wasn't trying hard enough to keep people close. But looking back, I can see it wasn't about effort. Bipolar disorder warps your ability to show up consistently. It makes you too much and then not enough and then gone entirely. And when you're a teenager, friendships aren't built to withstand that. Hell, most adult friendships aren't either. But the thing is, losing those friendships, it wasn't just about the disorder. It was about the fact that I didn't know what I was up against. You can't fight an invisible enemy. I spent years thinking I was just wired wrong, just bad at being a person. But once I had a name for it, bipolar disorder, I could finally start figuring out how to live with it. Instead of constantly feeling like I was failing at something no one else seemed to be struggling with. With a lot of people in my life, I pushed them away without even realizing it. The highs made me feel invincible, like I could take over the world with theater. But when the lows hit, I disappeared into myself, leaving everyone in my life with nothing but my absence. And eventually, that distance, that weight, was too much for me and many people that I love. I didn't understand it at the time, but looking back, I see how it affected the balance of my friendships. And that's the part of bipolar disorder that's hardest to explain. It's not just about you, it's about the people who have to live with your mood swings, the ones who are caught in the fallout. And while I'll always look back at my high school days with gratitude, I also see how my highs and lows started to create a divide that sometimes can't be bridged. But there's a catch. You can't be better for other people. And you can't always stay the same person you were before. Bipolar disorder won't let you. But the key is learning how to survive it, how to manage it, even when it feels like the world is just spinning out of control. And sometimes you have to accept that relationships, even the strongest ones, change. They adapt. They're reshaped by the chaos. But that doesn't make them any less important. Change isn't something that happens just to relationships. It happens to you. Bipolar disorder doesn't just shift the way people see you. It shifts the way you see yourself. One moment you feel invincible, buzzing with energy, convinced you can take on the world. The next you're crashing, barely able to function. And that's the thing, these shifts aren't just mood swings. They're entire states of being. And there's a fine but crucial line between hypomania and full-blown mania. For years, I lived in that in-between space. Hypomania made me feel sharp, alive, unstoppable. But it wasn't until I crossed into the threshold of mania that I realized how dangerous that invincibility could be. Managing bipolar disorder has been a journey of trial and error, especially when it comes to medications. At first, I was thrown on Depakote, thinking it would stabilize things. But the side effects were brutal, and it made me feel like I was just existing, not living. I wasn't me. After a lot of back and forth with my doctors, I switched to Vraylar, and that made a huge difference. It's not perfect, but it helps me stay stable without making me feel like I'm fading into the background. Bipolar disorder isn't just about riding the highs and crashing through the lows. It's not just about finding the right meds or managing triggers, though trust me, that is a full-time job within itself. There is a reality about bipolar disorder that I don't think is talked about nearly enough. The fact that too many of us don't make it. Bipolar disorder has one of the highest suicide rates of any mental illness. And I get why. Even with the right meds, even with the right therapy, even with every ounce of effort we put into trying to stay on top of things, bipolar disorder is a relentless fight. And sometimes it wins. Studies show that up to 20% of people with bipolar disorder will die by suicide. Which is a gut punch. Around 50% of people with bipolar disorder will attempt suicide at least once in their lifetime. Which means half of us will reach a point where we can't see a way forward. But just because that shadow is there, it doesn't mean it gets to define us. It doesn't mean we can't keep fighting. Because that's where the real power lies. Not in being perfect or having it all figured out. It's showing up every day and taking your medication even when it's hard. Even when the fight feels impossible. And in those small victories, the ones that don't always look like wins on the outside, we find what matters the most. I remember when I was a senior in high school and everything finally cracked. It wasn't one big thing, really. It was the weight of everything. College applications, expectations, the endless churn of trying to be fine when I absolutely wasn't. It felt like I was holding my life together with duct tape and prayers, and the tape was peeling. It all came to a head a few weeks before our spring musical Hairspray, my last show as a high schooler. I was running lights, and if you've ever done theater tech, you know that booth time can be oddly meditative. You're perched above the chaos, sliding the faders and hitting cues, pretending you're in control of something, even when you're falling apart. But that day I wasn't pretending very well. We were in the middle of a run, and I don't remember what set me off. A gel that needed adjusted? A missed cue? Maybe it was just the sheer reality of life moving forward, and I felt completely stuck. Whatever it was, I broke. completely. I left the booth, wandered into the auditorium, and just collapsed. Right there in the house, surrounded by empty seats and the faint buzz of stage lights. One of our tech directors found me, and I've never properly thanked them, but you know who you are. And they didn't ask me to explain. They didn't tell me just to take a breath or shake it off. They sat with me until the tears slowed enough for words. And then they did the thing that I couldn't do for myself. They called for help. And that's how I ended up in the hospital like 2 or 3 weeks before opening night. Not because I didn't care about the show. If anything, I cared too much. It felt like Hairspray was the last marker of my life as I knew it, and I couldn't see past it. I didn't know how to step into the future without the structure that high school had given me, without the safety of the dark theaters and familiar routines. The idea of graduating, of having to figure out what came next, it was suffocating. Eventually, I came back to school, quieter, drained, but determined to finish the show. I ran lights like nothing happened, like I hadn't just spent the last 2 weeks trying to convince myself life was worth living. And maybe that's the most ridiculous part of it all. The lights came up, the music swelled, the cast danced their heart out, and I was in the booth, hitting cues with shaking hands, pretending everything was normal. But it wasn't normal. It was survival. And survival doesn't always look like some triumphant made-for-TV moment. Sometimes it looks like pushing a button at the right time while your brain is screaming at you that none of it matters. Still, the show ended. The lights faded. We struck the set, took the obligatory blurry cast and crew photos, and went to the late night diner like we always did. And as I sat there, exhausted and hollow but alive, I didn't realize it at the time, that was the real victory. Not pulling off a perfect light show, but just making it to TGI Fridays afterwards. That was the moment I learned something they don't teach you in theater or in health class. Sometimes getting through it is enough. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to feel good. You just have to keep going until those house lights come up and you can finally rest. Because no matter what, there's no finish line with bipolar disorder. It's a daily commitment to myself, to my mental health, and to making sure I do everything I can to stay balanced. Bipolar disorder is complex, unpredictable, and not something you just get over. Whether you experience hypomania or full-blown mania, it's a constant battle to stay balanced. The key is learning how to advocate for yourself, how to manage triggers, and most importantly, how to accept that you're doing your best, even on the days when enough is just getting through. It is a lifelong journey. And sometimes, no matter how much I try to control it, bipolar disorder becomes the third party in my relationships, the uninvited guest that won't leave. Mental illness doesn't exist in a vacuum. It bleeds into friendships, family, and relationships. Relationships are hard enough as it is. Add in bipolar disorder, and the stakes get even higher. Studies show that people with bipolar disorder are more likely to experience unstable relationships, higher divorce rates, and difficulty maintaining long-term partnerships. One study found that 90% of marriages involving a partner with bipolar disorder end in divorce. 90%. 90. That is not a small number. That is a flashing neon sign that says this is hard. Really hard. Fun fact, my husband loves that statistic. He's quoted it to multiple friends, and I think he sees it as a challenge. But I get it. Bipolar disorder comes with mood swings, emotional intensity, impulsivity, and sometimes a complete inability to connect with the people you love. Manic episodes can make you feel invincible, reckless, like nothing can touch you, including the people who care about you. And the depressive episodes, those can make you withdraw so completely it's like you're not even there anymore. And the thing about bipolar disorder is it doesn't just disappear when you get your shit together. There is no done button, no neat little bow that you can tie on the end of this journey. Recovery is not a straight line. It's more like a winding road full of potholes, detours, and the occasional total breakdown. You think you're climbing to the top of the mountain, but sometimes you trip on a rock and end up in a ditch, wondering how you got there. But you get up, dust yourself off, and keep walking. Because what else are you going to do? Sit there? The reality is some days just getting through the day is an accomplishment. And you know what? That's enough. Because those days add up. The key to living with bipolar disorder is not beating yourself up for every mistake or misstep. It's about recognizing that sometimes the fact that you're still standing, still moving forward, it's the biggest victory of all. So yes, I may not be the perfect version of myself, but I am here. And if that means taking it slow and steady while I try not to accidentally start a cult during my next hypomanic phase, so be it. And the most important thing I've learned, it's okay to crack a joke about your psychotic break. Like when I was sure I was the reincarnation of some secret revolutionary ready to burn it all down. Spoiler alert, I wasn't. But instead of seeing that as a complete failure, I can look back and laugh. Because hell, it's either that or cry about how I once spent 3 hours talking about capitalism to a plant. We live and we learn. And honestly, the more I talk about it, the more I realize how important it is to just speak up about this stuff. There is no cure, no magic pill that makes it all disappear, but by owning it, by sharing these messy, unpredictable moments with you all, I'm slowly turning it into something that doesn't define me, but just is a part of me. It's not about being perfect. It's about being here in all our weird, chaotic glory. So yeah, I'm here, and I'm not giving up. Because the alternative is what? Being a footnote in a tragic movie where I'm the protagonist who doesn't make it? No. I would like to be the one who keeps moving, even when the plot doesn't make sense. And on days when I can't, I'll just laugh at the absurdity of it all. I think about those nights in the theater, long after the show had ended. The stage lights off, the seats empty, the chaos finally settled. There was always this moment, right before I'd leave, where I'd stand in the middle of the stage, listening to the hum of the rigging, the quiet creaks of the set settling into place. It was the only time the theater was truly still. I used to think that stillness meant the show was over, that everything had come to an end. But now, I think about it differently. Stillness isn't the end. It's the reset. It's the deep breath before everything starts again. And then, of course, there was the late night diner. Because no show was really over until we were crammed into a tiny vinyl booth at some 24-hour spot or at TGI Fridays. Still running on adrenaline, half in costume, tearing into plates of fries like we hadn't just spent the last 5 hours running on caffeine and nerves. I'm sure the waitstaff fucking hated us. We were delirious, we were exhausted, and we were together. And maybe that's what mattered most. Not the show itself, not the standing ovations or the missed cues, but the fact that we found each other in the in-between, in the quiet, in the moments after the lights went down. And that, my friends, is enough. This has been Beneath the Noise. My name is Emily Yatsko. You can email us at beneaththenoisepodcast@gmail.com. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you next time.